alongside the protective order that had been served to Desmond just days earlier, as well as his personal information.
It's just kind of crazy, every time you look up somebody getting or it's going on in the city.
Well, tonight, 7 News is covering the latest violent weekend in the district with 6 people shot overnight, all within the span of less than 24 hours. And just into our newsroom within the last couple of hours, police have now arrested a man for and killing a woman in Southeast. All of these things happening as the city looks for answers on how to deal with surging crime and violence. An emergency crime bill was put in place weeks ago, but now some are asking if that bill that's set to expire soon has made any impact. 7 News' Megan Clark is live in Southeast D.C. where that latest shooting happened. And Megan, this one was right in front of a police substation.
Carl, yes, and that substation just over my left corner here. Police say a man was taken to the hospital and expected to be okay, but at this hour they are still searching for a suspect. We spoke with neighbors in this area. They tell us they heard 10 to 12 gunshots. And they say it feels like there's no time and no place where these won't happen.
The craziest part is Sunday.
Around 11 in the morning here on Pennsylvania Avenue Southeast.
Once it happened, I just kind of prayed to myself that it wasn't no bystanders, nobody innocent getting hit.
Right in front of MPD's 6th District substation, neighbors still shaken up.
Gunshots just kind of going back and forth.
There are some stories that stay with you long after you hear them. Stories that make you put down whatever you're doing and just sit with the weight of what happened. This is one of those stories. It happened in the city of Atlanta, Georgia. In a quiet neighborhood on the south side of the city, in the early hours of a Sunday morning, a woman named Carol Mitchell lost her life. And what makes this story so heartbreaking, what makes it so important to talk about, is that she saw it coming. She tried to stop it. She did everything right. And it still wasn't enough. Carol was 52 years old. She had lived in that neighborhood for years. Her neighbors knew her. Her family loved her. She was the kind of woman who had built a life right there on her street, in her home, the same home where she would take her final breath. The man at the center of this story is named Raymond Cole. He was 46 years old at the time, and he also lived in Atlanta. Raymond and Carol had a history together, the kind of complicated, painful history that so many people quietly live through, far from the public eye. In the early morning hours of October 1st, 2023, between roughly 3:45 and 3:49 in the morning, neighbors called 911 after hearing gunshots coming from Carol's home. Police arrived and found her inside, suffering from multiple gunshot wounds. She was pronounced dead at the scene. Raymond was located not long after and taken into police custody. From the very beginning, officers described what happened as domestic in nature. Raymond was charged with first-degree murder while armed. But to understand what happened that morning, we have to go back just a few days, to the hours and the moments that led up to it. Because this story didn't start with a gunshot. It started with a phone call. A desperate, terrified phone call from a woman who knew she was in danger. Let me tell you about Carol Mitchell because she deserves more than just a name in a news headline. Carol was 52 years old, and she had spent much of her adult life in Atlanta. She was a real person with real connections, people who cared about her, a family who grieved her, neighbors who noticed when she was gone. She was the occupant of that home on the south side of town, the place she had made her own. And in the weeks and days before her death, she was living in fear. Carol had a history with Raymond Cole, and in the final days of her life, that history turned threatening. What we know from police records and court documents is that Carol reached out for help, not once, but multiple times. She was trying to protect herself. She was trying to use the tools available to her. And those of us watching from the outside need to ask ourselves, did the system do enough to protect her? 3 days before she died, Carol picked up the phone and called 911. She told emergency services that Raymond had threatened her. Officers came, documented the situation, wrote up a report. A record was made. And in the days that followed, that record would become part of the evidence used to charge him with her murder. The following day, September 29th, Carol went to court. She obtained a temporary protective order, what a lot of people call a restraining order, from a judge in Atlanta. That order was meant to legally prohibit Raymond from coming to her home or contacting her in any way. She was brave enough to go to court. She was scared enough to call the police. She was determined enough to fight for her own safety through every legal channel available to her. But courage and paperwork can only do so much against a man who has already decided what he's going to do. And Raymond Cole had already decided. Think about that for a moment. A woman, in the final days of her life, doing everything she was supposed to do. Calling 911, going to court, getting a protective order. And none of it was enough to save her. That is the tragedy at the heart of this story. That is what we need to sit with. Now, let's talk about what happened in the 24 hours before Carol died. Because the timeline of those final hours is both deeply painful and deeply important. On September 30th, the day before the shooting, Atlanta police were called to Carol's home twice. Twice in one day. Officers came to enforce the terms of the protective order. They found Raymond there, and they made it clear to him, "You are not allowed inside this woman's home. The court has ordered it. You need to leave." Officers even offered to help Raymond collect any personal belongings he had left at the house. They told him they would accompany him inside to get his things, but he could not be there alone. He was not allowed to be there at all without supervision. Raymond left that day under police escort. He walked away from that house knowing, without any doubt, that he was legally barred from returning. He had been told directly by uniformed officers what the rules were. And then the night came. In the dark, quiet hours of early October 1st, while the rest of the neighborhood slept, Raymond Cole made a choice. He went back to Carol's home. He didn't knock. He didn't call. He forced his way in, breaking the chain lock on the door, and entered a home he had been explicitly forbidden from entering. Inside that house, Carol was asleep, and so was a young family member, a child, in a separate bedroom down the hall. Raymond went up the stairs. I want you to imagine that for a moment if you can bear to. The silence of a house at 3 a.m. A woman asleep in her bed, unaware that the person she had gone to court to protect herself from had just broken down her door. A child nearby, sleeping, with no idea what was about to happen. Raymond reached the upstairs hallway. Carol woke up. There was a brief exchange of words, just moments, just seconds. And then Raymond pulled out a gun. He shot her once. The bullet struck her in the wrist and the neck. She collapsed to the floor. And then, while she was already down, he shot her again, this time in the chest. Carol Mitchell died on the floor of her own home. After the shooting, Raymond Cole did not run. He didn't panic. He didn't call for help. Instead, he went through Carol's personal belongings. He looked through her phone and her other devices. He took his time. And then, when he was finished, he walked out the door. It was the child, the young family member who had been sleeping down the hall, who finally called 911. That child, after everything they had heard and seen, picked up a phone and told the dispatcher that someone had broken into the house, shot Carol, and left. I cannot imagine the courage it took for that child to make that call. I cannot imagine what they saw, what they heard, what they will carry for the rest of their lives. When police arrived, they found Carol exactly where she had fallen. Multiple gunshot wounds. Pronounced dead at the scene. Raymond, meanwhile, had left, but not before doing something that tells you a great deal about who he is. After the shooting, he took steps to get rid of the gun. He disposed of the weapon. He was trying to erase the evidence. And then, eventually, knowing that police were looking for him, he turned himself in. When he walked up to the officer to surrender, he reportedly said that he believed police were looking for him in connection with a homicide. Not a shooting. A homicide. He knew what he had done. He knew Carol was dead. And he had spent the hours after her murder trying to cover his tracks. He was taken into custody. He was formally charged with first-degree murder while armed. And the case began to work its way through the legal system. The Atlanta Police Department's homicide investigators took over the case. They gathered forensic evidence, ballistics, injury patterns, the trajectory of the bullets, electronic records from Carol's devices. They collected statements from responding officers. And they had the 911 call, that heartbreaking recording made by the child who was there when it happened. At a hearing in January 2024, A judge listened to the evidence, including that 911 recording, and found that there was probable cause to believe Raymond Cole had killed Carol Mitchell. The case moved forward. In May of 2024, Raymond was offered a plea deal, plead guilty to first-degree murder while armed, accept a sentence with a recommended cap. He turned it down. Here is where we are today. On February 4th, 2026, Raymond Cole walked into a courtroom and entered a guilty plea to second-degree murder while armed for the killing of Carol Mitchell. Sentencing is scheduled for June 5th, 2026, before the same judge who presided over the earlier hearings. It took more than 2 years for this case to reach this point. More than 2 years since that terrible morning when a woman who had done everything right, who had called 911, who had gone to court, who had gotten a protective order, was shot and killed in her own home. And I think about that a lot. I think about what it means that we have these legal tools, restraining orders, protective orders, emergency services, and yet sometimes they are simply not enough to protect the people who need protection most. A piece of paper cannot stop a door from being broken down. A court order cannot physically stand between a frightened woman and a man who has decided he does not care about the consequences. This is not a criticism of the officers who came to Carol's home. This is not a simple story with a simple villain who could have been stopped by better paperwork. This is a story about a much larger problem, the gap between what the law promises and what it can actually deliver to someone in danger. Domestic violence is one of the most complicated and heartbreaking realities of our society. And homicides rooted in domestic situations are far more common than most people realize. In 2023 alone, Atlanta, like many major cities across the country, recorded more than 200 homicides. Carol Mitchell was one of them. What can we take away from her story? What should we carry with us after hearing it? Maybe it's this: that when someone tells you they are afraid, we should believe them. That when a woman calls 911 and says someone has threatened her, that call matters, every single one. That protective orders are a starting point, not a finish line. That the people responsible for enforcing those orders have an enormous, sometimes impossible responsibility. And that we as a community owe it to people like Carol to keep asking the hard questions about how we protect the vulnerable, about what more can be done, about why this keeps happening. Carol Mitchell was 52 years old. She lived in Atlanta. She had a life, and she had people who loved her. She tried to save herself, and she deserved to be saved. Her story is not just a case number. It's a reminder, painful and necessary, that behind every statistic is a real person, a real life, a real loss. Rest in peace, Carol. You deserved so much better. Follow for more.